it's extraordinary the time we're in, and all I can think about is you standing there on that border explaining the whole situation to us. And now we've got a few hundred friends that are eager to hear from you as well. So I guess, is it okay to get started? Do we have everybody?
Yes, let's go ahead.
Great, wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see many of you, and I'm glad you could join the Zoom call. We are in week 3 of a very serious war, Israel and Hamas, that is spreading its tentacles far and wide at this point. And I'm just wanting to give you a little bit of a backdrop because as many of you are kind of tuning in and tuning out to what's going on in Israel, kind of headlines this morning were 2 of the Israeli hostages were released, one that was 85 and one that was 79. And they have a tale to tell, unbelievable, about their time in captivity. And then also that we have just learned yesterday that there's been an attack on some of the U.S. Bases, military bases in Syria and Iraq, and which is really, really serious, mainly because we understand those are coming directly from Iran. That is the choice that Iran is making now very clearly, to step directly into this war. So I want to introduce to you one of our very dear friends, Ilan Shulman. He is a captain in the Israeli Defense Forces, a veteran who divides his time fulfilling his IDF reserve duties in the Northern Command's Intelligence Department. And he also guides geopolitical tours and is the favored educator for Congress as it concerns the northern border of Israel, Galilee, and the Golan Heights. We are so honored to have you, Ilan, with us. You're a wealth of knowledge. I'd like to just start by asking you a few questions, if it's okay, to be able to direct our time together. The White House on Monday said that Iran is actively facilitating rocket and drone attacks through their Iranian proxies on U.S. military bases in Iraq and Syria. And President Biden has directed the Defense Department to brace for more and to respond accordingly. Also, at the same time, just a few days ago, Israel bombed the 2 Syrian airports repeatedly over the last week. And we would like to get some insight from you on what you believe is going on. And are we likely to head into a 2-front war? What do you believe the U.S. and Israel need to do at this time?
Okay, so first, thank you for having me. And now we are reserved. So as you can see, this is the border with Syria. We're in the border crossing with UN soldiers standing here by me. And we have the Israeli forces being on the other side. So I would say here that in order to understand that, what Iran is trying to do here and the connection to the situation that we see in Gaza, I will say a few sentences about the culture, about the Quran. There's a story about Muhammad that left Mecca in 622. And he left Mecca because he couldn't preach for that new religion that called Islam. And the guy left, got to Medina. Medina in Arabic means city, the city of the prophet. And that's where he actually became a prophet. That's when people started to listen. That's where the Islam was established. And 6 years after, he came back. And he saw the people of Mecca. Part of them were part of his tribe. Most of them pagans. And realized that their army was stronger than his. He realized that he cannot fight them. And therefore, he decided to sign with them on an agreement. Kind of a peace agreement or a ceasefire agreement in a village that called Hudaybiyah. And therefore the Muslims call it Salh al-Hudaybiyah. And he actually committed that he won't attack them in the next 9 years, 9 months, and 9 days. People got back to their business. Many left the city. It was a trade city on the Silk Road. And then 2 years after, Muhammad invaded and conquered Mecca. Wow. And there's a big issue here. how come the prophet, someone that consider as ma'asum, means cannot make any mistakes, because everything he was doing and saying was Bismillah, in the name of Allah, how he eventually decided here to violate an agreement. So the Islam say, no, Muhammad actually trying to teach us here something. If your enemy is undefeatable and you have no option to win, don't attack. There's no point of doing that. But if you manage to identify a point of weakness, then strike.
Wow.
Another thing is that you cannot have real peace agreements, long-term agreements, with someone that consider as non-Muslims. Sulha, forgiveness, that's something that you can have one Muslim with another. I believe that here we got to a point that that's Salh al-Hudaybiyah. I believe that when Iran look at Israel, look at US, they see a point of weakness. They see here, first of all, America as a superpower country that diverted the attention from the area of the Middle East to the South China Sea, to the area of Taiwan, the Philippines, the area of India and Australia and Japan, and eventually not necessarily here this area. And then the other area where US is facing is Ukraine. And then after abortions, inflation, immigration, and COVID, etc. And eventually Iran came and said, we see now that US losing the military credibility in the area. On September 2019, they made an experiment. They wanted to test that. And therefore they decided to use their proxies in Yemen, the Houthis, in Iraq, and directly from Iran to attack Khurais and Abqaiq, the oil refineries and the fields, the oil fields of Aramco, American Arab fields in Saudi Arabia. There was no response came. And I think that that was the proof that US gradually leaving or not willing to sacrifice as much as they did in order to make the war to be a better place to live in. But in that time, Israel looked very strong. In that time when Iran made the same experiments here by Israel, and it started even before the Saudis. We saw in May 2018 that Iran attacked Israel by 32 different rockets being launched from Syria by the proxies, by the Shiite militias. 28 of them landed in Syria, call it magic, and 4 shot down by the Iron Dome. Israel responded by destroying 65 Iranian targets, assets, there in Syria. And Iran got the message. But since then, things changed. And we started to see more and more Israelis getting out of the streets, protesting against the government. The feeling was that the army starting to collapse. The politics got into the army. It was impossible to keep it out. They heard about reservists from special forces, pilots from respectable squadrons that refused to volunteer to do reserves. And I think that this is the point that they started to see the Salh al-Hudaybiyah, that weakness here in Israel. In the same time, we saw also the Iranians starting to build this ring of fire around Israel and get it to be more and more effective. And that's part of the Iranian strategy, which means Iran made a decision that as a result of their poor air force and the fact that they have many missiles, they will do 2 things at once, which is exporting the Islamic Revolution and creating a Shiite hegemony in the Middle East. And second, face their enemies, destroying the main ones as Israel. How it works, it's a simultaneous threat, which means there's the nuclear, it's there in Iran, almost getting there, turning to be a latency nuclear state. And in addition to the nuclear, the idea was to use failed states like Syria and arm proxies inside by missiles, rockets, and drones in order to create rings of fire around Israel. Let's take Hezbollah as an example. Hezbollah that today have their presence in Syria and in Lebanon is the main proxy of Iran. We're talking about 30,000 people in active regular service and about 80,000 in reserves. Besides that, Hezbollah is armed by 135,000 rockets, by 65,000 missiles, 10,000 of that considered as accurate weapon, which means if they will decide so, they can destroy potentially the headquarters in Tel Aviv, or the shopping mall crossing the street, or the airport in Tel Nov, or the hospital in the center of the country. Which means those are the capabilities that they built. In addition to that, Iran has 5,000 drones that they provided Hezbollah in Lebanon. 5,000 drones. And those are kamikaze drones, bomber drones, and intelligent drones. And we saw since this current conflict started that they used many of them. Besides Hezbollah, Iran have many other organizations being around us. That's not the only one. And I think that now Iran started to see in the past few years that not only them building this ring of fire, but also Israel. I won't call it a ring of fire, but I will call it an ability to stand against Iran, not by ourselves. And that was with the help of US, getting closer to Arab Sunni countries in the Middle East. We're talking about the Abraham Accords with the UAE, with the Bahrainis, with the Sudanis and the Moroccans. We're talking about the caramelization we're starting to have with, hopefully we'll have with Saudi Arabia. And we're talking about the relationship, very close relationship that we have with Azerbaijan. And here two things happened. First, Iran feels a lot of confidence in their ring of fire. Means they managed to provide Hezbollah capabilities, which they believe that might be enough in order to destroy Israel. Besides that, they provided part of those capabilities also to Hamas in Gaza and their branch in Lebanon. Besides that, Iran is not as isolated as they were before. They're under sanctions of US, but we see that their economy is surviving, and mostly because of the fact that they sell 1.3 million barrels a day to China. And there are enough Chinese to buy that oil. In the same time, Iran managed to seize the opportunity of the war in Ukraine. And we started to see them getting closer to Russia as a result of that. And things they didn't manage to do fighting together with the Russians against the rebels in Syria, they managed to do in Ukraine. Because they helped Putin after the Antonovsky Bridge, the Moscow Bridge to Crimea Peninsula was destroyed by the Ukrainians, and he was in the lowest point ever. Believed that he had the second army in the world and didn't manage to defeat the Ukraine army, a country of 60 million people. And here the Iranians started to provide them kamikaze drones. So I think that here that confidence definitely helped, but there's another thing that happened, and that's the concern of Iran because of the relationship that we have with the Azerbaijanis and the fact that they managed to defeat the Armenians with the Israeli weapons. But I would say here the main thing, the normalization with Saudi Arabia. And here Iran, seeing that security threat, also an economic one. Biden talked about a railway that's going to start from India, going to get to Saudi Arabia, cross Jordan, and from there to the Haifa port, from there to Europe. That's an economic threat on Iran. That's an economic threat on the road and belt of Xi Jinping, of the Chinese. That's an economic threat on Russia trying to get here to the Middle East. And I think that in this case, they're also doing an experiment. We saw Abdullahian, their foreign minister. We saw Ismail Qaani, the commander of the Al-Quds Battalion of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, having meetings with militias, Iranian militias or proxies in Iraq, in Syria, and in Lebanon in the past few months. And we followed each of those meetings. In the same time, we realized that the one that Iran will probably choose to be the first to start that conflict with Israel, that experiment with Israel, starting to see if Israel is weak enough now to be defeated, is Hamas. And why Hamas? Hamas actually is not the classic proxy. Hamas is a Sunni organization the Harakat Mukamma al-Islamiyya, the movement for the Islamic resistance. That's not the Islamic resistance of Iran being Shiite, trying to create a Shiite hegemony in the Middle East. They are part of the Muslims' Brotherhood. But Hamas today feel very isolated, the same as Iran, because the Saudis won't support Hamas anymore. And the UAE won't support Hamas anymore. And I think that in that point, Iran realized that this is the organization that can be used. And Israel, that believed that things can be solved by different agreements, by economic assistance coming from Qatar, and eventually try to understand Hamas from our perspective, as if we're going to give them money, they will create a better quality of life for the people of Gaza. The people of Gaza will have more to lose, and then it's going to look more like the West Bank. We're going to see less attack. As a result of that, that was a wrong assessment.
Yes, correct. That's
Most
so
because of the fact that the culture is different. There, it's about the ideology. And the ideology there is, once we talking about a fundamentalistic group, is more important than all the rest. We think about money, about prosperity, about convenience, about peace. They don't think about those things. And I think that when we had more than 1,000 Nukhba terrorists crossing the border on the 7th of October, killing babies in front of their parents, burning live people in the vehicles, coming with the paragliders, landing in a nature party over there, a music festival there in Ra'im, close to Gaza, and murdering young people that just came to celebrate the holiday. So I think that in that point, that was a wake-up call, not only for Israel, but for all of us. The same as the wake-up call that we got in 9/11, the same as with the one that we got in 2014 with ISIS, and now we have it here with Hamas being part of that coalition, part of that axis of evil, together with Iran.
It's really remarkable. Ilan, I want to break in here and ask you to help us understand the players that are in Syria. We know that Hezbollah is in Lebanon, but I also understand they're in Syria. And are they connected to each other? Who's calling the shots there? And then tell us about Bashar al-Assad. Does he want a war with Israel? He's of course, the leader of Syria. And are we going to see tanks like we did in 1982? What's ahead of us concerning Syria?
Okay. So first of all, I would say in terms of analyzing the forces there in Syria, the Syrian army was pretty big and one of the main threats on Israel before the civil war began there on March 2011. Since then, 1 million people got killed, 6.8 million became displaced, 6.6 million refugees, and the army that had 350,000 soldiers in active service and 500,000 in reserve, today have left with about 30,000. Which means that there's not much of a Syrian army over there, not something that considered as a threat on Israel. But the thing is that the civil war there in Syria, the tragedy for the people of Syria there, turned to an opportunity for the Iranians that started from 2012 into 2013. A long time now, and it increased the Iranian entrenchment, military and civil entrenchment, since 2017, 2018, when most of the rebels groups, includes ISIS, were defeated. And then the Iranians started to bring Iraqis militias, many of them, for example, as they say, Al al-Haq, Liwazu al-Fikar, Liwafad al-Labas, Liimam al-Hassin, Hezbollah al-Bayt, Hezbollah Katab, Hezbollah Harakat al-Nujaba, Hashd al-Sha'biya. There are many more. You don't need to remember all the names, but what I'm trying to say, that today, and I'm saying today, Iran has in Syria about 100,000 of those fighters.
Wow.
Ready to be used against Israel if Iran will decide so. Part of those guys born to fight. We see the Afghani Fatamayun or the Pakistani Zanabiyun. These are groups that were born to fight. Those guys are warriors since 16, 17 years old. And now many of them are in their 30s. Besides that, we see the Iraqis militias that experience the fighting against ISIS. And the one that leads all of that, the guy that practically replaced the supreme commander, which was Qasem Soleimani, that assassinated by US on the 3rd of January 2020, is Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon.
Mm.
And we see Hezbollah there in Syria trying to get deeper and deeper. And it's not only in the military level, but also by building mosques, by building Husseini's cultural centers.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea there is to convert Sunnis to become Shiites. We see them having real estates there in Syria, controlling the natural resources, controlling 3rd of Damascus, the capital.
Mm-hmm.
Means that the idea of Iran, with the help of Hezbollah, is practically to take over Syria bottom up.
Mm.
But I think, and therefore, in terms of Assad, he will let them to stay there, but he's powerless.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that once we talk about Assad, I think that he understands very well
Mm-hmm.
that without the Iranians, he could end his career in the same way as Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen, Zain al-Abidin ibn Ali in Tunisia, Mubarak in Egypt, and Omar al-Bashir in Sudan. All of those guys lost their positions or died during the Arab Spring, so-called.
Mm-hmm.
Assad is still there. And I think that Assad will let the Iranians to do whatever they need using his land and his people there in Syria. So this is something that we have to prepare for. And it's not about having. Behind me, we have a division and a half, being in the Golan, being on the Lebanese border. We're talking here about half of the Israeli army, even more. We're talking about 150% reservists that decided to join the army here. Usually we have 1% of the Israelis that's supposed to do reserve that actually get there. The disadvantage is the fact that we have people that haven't trained in the past 5-6 years. And this is one of the reasons that Israel take its time in terms of the attack, the ground maneuver in Gaza. And at the same time, being prepared to the one that might come as a result of that from Lebanon and from Syria. So now they're having barbecue, they enjoy themselves during the day and during the night. They practice and a lot. And yeah, people hear explosions here. And under these circumstances that so many civilians got killed, they get stressed. But eventually that's the Israeli fire that preparing our forces for the wars. It's hard to say till now whether Iran made a decision here that this is the day to destroy Israel. These are the stars that eventually arranged in the right way, and this is Allah showing them, now it's the time to do it. I don't think that that decision was made before Hamas attacked Israel. And I'm telling you that as an intelligence officer, because of the fact that after Hamas attacked, then we started to see Hezbollah recruiting reservists. Then we started to see more and more Iraqis militias by the thousands moving into Syria and part of them into Lebanon. And we follow after those movements. We see Hezbollah that gradually they're more and more on the Lebanese border. We're preventing many anti-tanks missiles attacks. We're preventing many drones, bomber drones attacks. Part of them managed to cross into Israel. Soldiers got killed as a result of that. But it's still in a level of an operation. It's not a war. And we see that Hezbollah is very cautious about crossing that line. And I'm assuming that part of it is a result of Iran that haven't made a decision. And part of it is a result of the fact that that's eventually a Lebanese organization. And this is my concern regarding to the groups in Syria. They have nothing to lose. There's no Syria anymore. That's a destroy state. And in the same way that Iran saw Israel attacking there in Syria and didn't really care about that. And after the deliveries that we're destroying, after the airports that we're destroying, trying to stop those weapon deliveries getting into Lebanon or to the Shiite militias in Syria, we see Iran do it again and again and again. And my concern is that eventually they might surprise us from this border, from the Syrian one. And therefore, I'm not the only officer that's saying that. And we have many others that come in and say, we have to be ready here. We have to make sure that our reservists will know that this is something that can turn to be very active. Meanwhile, we had a few rockets from here, from the Syrian border. We had several drones. All of them were stopped from Israel. And people will say, okay, nothing is new. So first of all, whoever gets now to the Golan, and you've been here more than several times, it looks very, very different. You see the military everywhere. You
Everywhere.
see hundreds of tanks. You see the roads full with them. You see armed personal carriers with their trucks moving on the paved roads, something that was always considered as illegal in Israel. You see platoons of special forces being in the communities. Everyone traumatized by the situation that we weren't prepared for with Hamas in Gaza. And this, if they will decide to open this front, that's going to be much, much worse, unfortunately, than the one in Gaza. But we here having an advantage. They don't have the surprise element. We're ready for them. And those forces here are full with motivation, understanding that this is a war about the existence of Israel.
So, Ilan, let me ask you this. You know, as an intelligence officer, and just your assessment and your long experience, one of the things that I want to clarify that you just said is that Iran had not made a decision yet. Once Hamas Israel war started, they stepped in pretty much after that. What I'm hearing you say is that they have not made a decision about going to war with Israel and now the United States, because now they're going to be at war with the United States. And what would be your indications that they're going to step in and open a new war theater on the northern border? What are the indications that you're looking for? Do you think that they're going to do that?
So first of all, yeah, it's about making assumptions because we really don't know. I think that there's no one today that can know what Iran will decide. I'm not so sure that they know. I think that here Iran facing a dilemma, which means that Iran probably knew about the Hamas. Maybe Iran is the one that sent the Hamas, but maybe the Hamas was the one that told Iran, we see that point of weakness. We think that we want to strike. You're with us or not? And the Iranians said, yeah, of course, we have this axis of evil. We work together. And the resistance is the Mukama Muwahada, the united resistance. But here Iran is starting to see that it's not necessarily works like that. Because eventually we have here different organizations with different agendas. Hezbollah won't volunteer to step in because they're endangering Lebanon. In terms of the West Bank, they have different things to lose over there. And there's a chance that the Palestinian Authority maybe will eventually get control over Gaza. Who knows? They believe that it might happen. The Iraqis militias, the militias in Syria, those ones in Yemen, each of them having their own problems. If Iran will decide, okay, but we are the one that sponsor you, we are the one that train you, we are the one that arm you, so now attack all together, they might do it. We still don't know. But I think that here Iran facing a big dilemma because Israel might destroy their southern front, which means Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Israel eventually might kill 30,000 or more terrorists from the Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And now will get itself to a much better position to face Hezbollah, knowing that we destroy one front and we can face only one direction or two, Lebanon and Syria, being in the same area. This is a dilemma. There's another one. If they will decide now to use Hezbollah, this is the main tool that Iran has today in order to protect the nuclear project. Means if Israel will destroy that tool, let's say that Israel will decide, okay, so now we have another attack coming from Lebanon. Maybe we won't bring to a complete destruction of Hamas because we need to get more forces to the bigger front, which is Hezbollah. But we have here another thing that changed the equation. We have American aircraft carriers.
Right.
And one of them, Eisenhower, is in the area of the Red Sea. And the other one of Gerald Ford being here in the Mediterranean. And we're talking about the biggest one. We're talking about 75 aircrafts and many Tomahawk missiles and a very advanced intelligence, submarines, destroyer ships, all around it, standing there and coming and say, hey, guys, you thought that we left the Middle East? That's not the situation. We're getting back in with our strong fist. And we're realizing that maybe the only way to stand against you, it's with that strength that only America has. And I think that this is something that changed the decision-making there in Iran.
Yeah.
When they attacked American bases, being in Iraq and in Syria before, I think that was Mark Miley that talked about it. There were almost no response. More than 83 attacks over American bases before the current conflict, and America responded only 3 times. Now it's starting to change. And we see Austin bringing more forces here to the Middle East, not in order to have a war with Iran. Everyone trying to avoid that. But eventually to show Iran it won't work.
Right.
We're going to have enough forces, to destroy your proxies. And we have enough forces, if we will decide so, to destroy only Iran, also Iran. And those forces are going to be American forces, but maybe we're going to see other forces in the Middle East joining that. There are many figures in the Middle East that can send from Iran at least as Israel and US do. Many forces. And I think the help of US, by the understanding that US is with us, supporting us, those forces will start to get also the courage to actually stand against Iran instead of going toward a detente and the different normalization agreements, having no other option but to make allies which they cannot believe in.
Right.
The guys with the Ayatollahs there in Iran, the only thing they want is building an empire and do it by a lot of destruction.
Well, Ilan, this is just an unprecedented time, and we have no way to possibly thank you enough for being such a formidable leader and IDF intelligence captain and all the role that you're playing there on the border and for Congress, illuminating and bringing the extremely important education. And so we just want to stop and say thank you for the tremendous efforts. I think that we hope that the next time we see you, we're going to enjoy the lush pasture of the Golan Heights once again, and that in the course of this season of time, it is a season of war. It's not a season of peace. And how important it is that the leaders of the United States and Western allies and the Western world have a very clear picture and are able to define the reality accurately. As Winston Churchill did in his day up and against Neville Chamberlain, who was shuttling diplomacy and trying to arrange peace in the rise of Nazi Germany, Winston Churchill detected that was the wrong approach, and not just wrong, but that it was deadly. And he saw that it was going to be really defending freedom in the midst of tyranny, and he built his whole case that way, but he went out to the dangerous edge of things to make a very important decision inside of Europe and for Great Britain. And I believe that the United States of America is doing that same thing. And with all of these on this call, I am in agreement with Ilan and Ari and everybody here. We are in agreement to pray and to stand on the wall throughout this war to its completion until Hamas has been completely conquered, their military, their political position, the entire thing has rolled up like a cheap lawn chair. And I want to thank you, Ilan, again for being with us. And we look forward to having you brief Congress in a few days, if you're willing to do that. We've got a lot of people that are eager to hear from you. So we'll look forward to that. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And then, your wonderful Ari Sacher up here in the corner, like the Brady Bunch. We're all in these boxes. But I wanted to have Ari weigh in. And Ilan, if you need to go, please don't feel that you have to stay. But I wanted
I'm here.
Ari, Ari is our former chief engineer of Iron Dome, my long-term friend and partner with USIEA. He serves as one of our policy advisors on Capitol Hill, and he has been the chief educator on the missile defense systems and programs between the United States and Israel. And he will go down in history as the legendary figure that helped us all understand Iron Dome. But I wanted Ari just to weigh in. We're going into week 3. Ari, we're actually inside of week 3. What do we need to be concerned about? What do you want to tell us going into week 3?
Yeah, just a quick snapshot of what's going on in my part of the world, my part of town. I think Ilan weighed in heavily on the northern border. I'll look at the southern border. In Rafael, my day job, the place where missiles are us. We have switched to all IDF all the time. Any kind of weapon that was going to be delivered to a customer that is not Israel, that could be used by the IDF, is being delivered to the IDF. All other customers are being pushed aside. We'll worry about them at a later date. It is critical that IDF get all of the missiles that it needs, all of the weapons that it needs, because this upcoming ground incursion into Gaza is going to be problematic. Not only do we need offensive weaponry, but we need defensive weaponry as well. I mean, it's patently clear to everybody that the weapons system that's been getting the most use in the last 2.5 weeks has been Iron Dome. They've fired close to 7,000 rockets. I just mean Hamas. There's also been a number of weapons that have been coming in from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, and from some of the minor leaguers. The Toledo Mudhens of Lebanon are also firing in just to say, yay, verily, we exist. And Iron Dome is shooting those down as well. It's really a yeoman's job. There was an excellent article that was just published in the Hill by Congressman Vargas and Weber about Iron Dome and David Sling and how well they're working, and we have to be very careful about these weapon systems because they are so bloody good. They reduce this threat of rockets on our urban areas to a mere nuisance, and that could lead to nonchalance. I suggest that it has led to nonchalance. We're getting very, very used to living behind a wall, and until October the 7th, it was very, very comfortable. I think we all understand in Israel the criticality of not living behind a wall, of exerting force, of understanding the neighborhood that we live in. We wanted to have a small, compact army, and we wanted to wage peace on our enemies, and we wanted war to be a thing of the past, and that's just not happening. And I think Israel as a country is waking up and understanding that things that are ugly that we did in the past, people were doing 30 days of reserve duty in the past, these are going to become part of the future as well, because we need to stand up and fight for our country, and that's what Israelis are going to do. One of the cool things that we're standing up and fighting with is a new weapon system that was just revealed a day or two ago. It was used by the Maglan Special Ops. It was called Iron Sting, and it's really, really cool. What you do is you take a mortar. Here's what they do. They take a mortar. A mortar is really like a grenade, and then you stick a little fin on the back so it flies, and then you stick it in a tube, and you say the magic words, Allahu Akbar, goes up, and it goes down, and it goes boom, and hopefully it goes boom in the proximity of of Israelis, and that's called terror. What we have done, what Israel has done, actually the Elbit company, one of our fiercest competitors, but I'm tooting their horn. Elbit has taken a 120 millimeter, it's about yay big. It's taken a 120 millimeter mortar. It has attached GPS. It's attached a laser guidance system. So instead of this thing landing 100, 200, 300, 400 feet from where you wanted it to land, it lands about 3 feet from where you wanted it to land. And we have actually been using it in the north of the country to take out people who have fired anti-tank weapons at us. Anti-tank weapons from the north are extremely, extremely dangerous. As a family, we had a very, very close run-in on Friday night. My nephew was up in the north, and he was trying to find a space on the border. He was a commander in the infantry, and he was caught by Hezbollah operatives. They fired an anti-tank weapon at him. They missed him, but hit the guy behind him and killed him. He's in the hospital. He just got out. I believe he got out of the hospital today. He escaped with minor injuries. It is important to find out the source of that anti-tank weapon, which is exactly what he did. And he was lying wounded on the ground. He gave the source of the anti-tank weapon to the IDF. The IDF used one of our weapons, which goes exactly where it needs to go, took out the window in which the anti-tank weapon was fired, and that those people were summarily introduced to 72 virgins. Israel is using the weapons that we have, the precision that we have, to take out the people that need to be taken out. Sometimes these people are in buildings. Sometimes they are taken out with their families. And that's a price that Hamas has to pay, because we did not start this war. We're going to finish this war, but we didn't start this war. Iron Domes are being built in Israel. People don't know, but 75% of every Iron Dome interceptor is built in the United States. It's shipped to Israel for final integration. So we're getting those regularly, and people are working hard to build more. The United States was kind enough to return 200 odd Iron Dome interceptors that were sold to the U.S. in 2020. The Army chose not to use Iron Dome. They felt it would be better to develop their own system at the cost of a couple of $1 billion. But hey, it's their money. It's your money. But it is what it is. Let's talk about the ground incursion. People are asking when the ground incursion is going to happen, and Israelis we're getting an itchy trigger finger, and I'm talking about the Israelis that are in the home front, because we are being stretched, and we have the atrocities that were levied on this country, the amount of sheer appall and hatred and fear that was in our hearts. We want something done, and we're waiting for something to be done, and it's a case of a string being pulled until it's as taut as it gets, and we're waiting and waiting and waiting for the ground incursion. And as a famous rabbi once said, the waiting is the hardest. No, it wasn't a rabbi, it was Tom Petty. The waiting is the hardest part, and we are waiting for the IDF to go in and do what we believe it needs to do, what the IDF believes it needs to do as well. There are two reasons why we haven't gone in yet. One reason is militarily. Going into Gaza is going to be difficult. Hamas knows we're coming, and they've booby-trapped everything, and therefore we need to pummel Gaza from the air as much as we can. Sometimes you see these really cool things. Sometimes you see a shot that takes out a building, and then everything falls into the ground. That's because underneath that building, there were tunnels. Sometimes you see a shot that takes out a building, and then all of a sudden, the rocket's red glare, and everything starts flying into the air. That's because we hit a rocket storehouse. By the way, they are still firing rockets at us, which leads to the question, why in Gaza are they running out of just about everything other than rockets? And that's true to an extent. The amount of rockets that they've been firing at us has been going down over the last couple of days. That said, about an hour ago, we took a huge salvo of rockets to the center of the country. One landed in near my mother-in-law's house, which had nothing to do with my mother-in-law. you take what you can get, and it was not shot down by Iron Dome. Iron Dome is still doing a good 95% or so, but that still means every 1,000 rockets they fire at us, 50 of them are going to fall and do damage. Israelis have become excellent at listening to the home front command. When we are told to go into bomb shelters, we go into bomb shelters. We have a three-pronged strategy to take care of, to protect ourselves from rocket fire. We have warning, we have taking cover, and we have our active defense systems, Iron Dome and David Sling, which have been doing a yeoman's job. The last thing I want to talk about is Gaza itself. There is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza that is brewing. The Gazans, you are either a member of Hamas or you are against Hamas. The only problem is that people that are against Hamas are typically summarily shot, and therefore many Gazans are being held prisoners against their will. For this reason, Israel told everybody, look, we essentially said, we're going to be entering the north of Gaza. Everybody out of the pool, and anybody who's going to remain in the pool is going to, their lives are in danger. Your lives are in danger because you want it to be. And people started heading south. 700,000 people have headed south to where we told them that they would be protected from our bombing. We're going to concentrate our campaign on the northern part of Gaza, which is, by the way, where all the rocket fire is coming from. Hamas obviously blocked the roads in order to prevent some of these people from making their way down, because they wanted to use these people as human shields, something they've been doing over the past. Still, 700,000 people have headed towards the Egyptian border, which remains closed. The Egyptians do not want any Gazans to enter Egypt, and there's a number of reasons. Reason number one is because it's a security risk. Reason number two, it's expensive. Reason number three, which is their reason that they're telling everybody, if the Palestinians go into Egypt, then we solve the Palestinian problem. Therefore, in order to make sure that people solve the Palestinian problem, we're not going to solve the Palestinian problem. Israel, my friends, is not going to solve the Palestinian problem either. There is a humanitarian crisis. People need food, people need drink, people need hospitals, and they are not getting it because Gaza is not supporting it. They need to be let out of Gaza, and they need to be treated like refugees from Ukraine or refugees from Syria. This is not Israel's problem. It's not even Egypt and Jordan's problem. It is a global problem, something that needs to be solved. And we need to do it sooner rather than later, because the optics of a humanitarian crisis, as far as Israel is concerned, is terrible. No, it's not our fault, but it sure does look bad. And I am hoping and praying that the next time I speak to you, I have better news, more optimistic news, but we are motivated. Our motivation is sky high, and we are hoping and praying that the IDF goes in, does what it needs to do, comes out victorious. Thank you very, very much.
Yes. Wow. Well, Ari, thank you for that incredible report and review on where things are and how to look to the future. And it is just, for such a time as this, I recall the prophecy out of Isaiah where he said, the foreigners will rebuild your walls, O Israel, and their kings will serve you. And it's been incredible to see the U.S.-Israel collaboration, and so grateful for the role that USIEA is playing inside of that dynamic, particularly on missile defense. And it is just a time like no other. And there's a dropping off point where there are certain things that are out of the hands of man and they are in the hands of God. And we must realize that in the midst of the impossibilities that surround this war, that we are in a season of war. As I walk down the street, as I'm in the grocery store in different places, people say, it just feels like we're sort of on the brink of war. And I said, that would be because we are on the brink of war. It's a time not to do business as normal. It's time to be able to take a portion of your day, your evening, an hour, whatever it is, and to actually be in prayer over our U.S. government leaders, to be in prayer over Israel's leaders and our allies who are making decisions right now. They all have to make a major choice as to whether to stay with Israel, even if there is a humanitarian crisis, to the very end of this war. And so it's a time to be in prayer. It's a time not to do business as normal, even here in the United States. Well, I want to say Israel needs our prayers and financial support. As you know, USIEA is meeting with and educating and serving members of Congress. And on the Hill, we've got briefings going on. We've got op-eds being written right now. We have the very significant group of Iron Domes as a result of a briefing that we did that are headed back to Israel right now. This is USIEA right in the midst of this important dialogue between the United States and Israel. And